And now I'm giving the voice to our moderator, Carolina.
Thanks so much. So I think we have representative here of almost all domain of entrepreneurship can have. We have a non-profit entrepreneur, we have a social enterprise, and we do have for-profit entrepreneur as well. So in a way, maybe we can start with very briefly, if, each of you can say broadly, what is the difference between non-profit entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and for-profit enterprise, just to set the scene and have that kind of background going on before we jump to other questions.
I think I'm going to start because I have a microphone. So I can talk about nonprofit entrepreneurship because that's been Lafiya since the beginning of its foundation. So nonprofit entrepreneurship, I think on one hand is maybe perhaps a bit easier because we have a very clear measurement. We're basically looking at impact, and that's our main goal. So we don't have this dichotomy between looking at like profit and revenues and responding to our shareholders while also trying to do social impact, which I am incredibly impressed by both of you to do. But it also poses other challenges with it. I think one of the main things is very hard for nonprofit organizations, especially quite young ones, to continue growing and scaling because funding, especially long-term funding, not for specific projects, is quite scarce and quite rare, especially outside of the EA community. And it's a bit frustrating on that front because it definitely timelines are quite much longer as compared to my experience in startups, and it feels like we could be doing so much more with more funding, with more opportunities, but there is definitely, I guess, not necessarily less that we can do. I guess there's also not just showing the impact, but also making sure that it fulfills the donors' requirements and mandates. So I think from my experience on for-profit place, it's been slightly easier to communicate because if you have the revenues there, like you could be able to get more support on that front. So I think that's my perspective.
I think that entrepreneurship, whether it's non-profit or not-for-profit or for-profit entrepreneurship, at the core, fundamentally, it's about starting new initiatives. And the difference is just about what you optimize for, whether it's impact, whether it's revenues. And as you've said, with nonprofits, you mainly optimize or you only optimize for impact. With social enterprises, you optimize for both. For both impact, or in my case, I try to do as much impact as possible and then make money to run the operation. And with for-profit, you mainly, I think, focus on making sure that the venture is profitable, and then social impact is also a part of it. So you have like a double bottom line. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely. Like we decided to use technology to solve some really complex problem in Poland, which is a mental health issue and access to mental health support. And we decided to use technology for that. So we kind of need profit to actually finance our operations because, as you probably know, hiring designers, developers, etc., it costs a lot of money. So it's easier for us to provide solution that is also really useful for our target group, which is mental health specialists, and also connect them to their patients. And along the way, we found our social campaigns, free consultations via our revenue. So we need to make revenue to use part of that to generate social impact. So this is just another way of operating. And I think, as Klau said, it's a bit easier because we have easier access to money, but it's still really hard to juggle between the social impact and optimizing for revenue, which sometimes it's really on different, like this is a completely different perspective sometimes. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges, but also quite easier to do that. So yeah.
So as you can see, like in theory, it's all about one difference between those different models. Like, where do you get your funding from? On the other hand, it does kind of have this follow-through effect on almost many decisions that you make as an organization or a company. So it's not just one difference that leads to one different decision. It's kind of, will affect how you do long-term planning. How do you, monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of your projects, how you track your progress. And I think that we'll see kind of the differences coming in as well as we probably going for that. I also want to add to the audience that I don't want to be the only person asking questions. So if you do have questions, there'll be space later on for you to either raise your hand and just ask your questions directly. If you prefer to submit them on the application, you can do it as well. So all you have to do is go to Swapcard on your phone or laptop, click on the panel in the agenda, and there you'll go have like a discussion section where you can submit questions that I will have a look on my phone as well and be able to ask. So feel free to ask questions verbally in raising your hand, but also if you prefer to just submit them, you can do it as well. Okay, one of the most common questions I get from people, not only at the conference, but more broadly as well, is what makes a good entrepreneur? What it takes? Is it particular skills? Is it particular background? Is there any psychological traits that might predispose people to it? So I'm very curious about your perspective. First of all, when you realize that entrepreneurship is a career path for you, when you realize, I might be good at this thing, I might give it a shot, and maybe more broadly, kind of stepping out of yourself a little bit, what other traits that maybe are not something that played a big role in you and your choice are important for people as well. So if our audience wants to get a sense whether they could be a good fit for entrepreneurship, what other traits you think are quite important in that?
Okay, maybe I can start. It will be hard to say, but to be honest, I don't think I'm really good at entrepreneurship. So it's really hard. It's a really hard job. And I think you have to juggle your mental health with something that you strive for, like the mission that you're trying to accomplish and help other people. But on the other side, you have to somehow try to also take care of yourself, which is really hard. So I don't think I'm super good at it, to be honest. It's either that or that for me sometimes. But I think the good qualities like you should have as an entrepreneur, it's always understanding business. Like you have to have business knowledge, whether it's for profit, non-profit, whatever. But if you want to have impact, if you want to build something that's scalable, that really affects a lot of people, then you need to understand business really well on the like basic traditional business models and how to like scale your company or your NGO, how to work with other people and stuff like that. So I think it's really important not to forget that it's not only about the social part, but it's also about the business part in a way that you need to gather money to fund the thing that you're trying to accomplish, how you try to help others. So on one hand, it's being really good at the business stuff. On the other hand, it's really understanding the issue that you want to like help with. Like, so you can't just you can't just say, oh, I want to take care of that. You have to really understand it, like talk to the people that you want to help, like understand their perspective, their lives, their struggles, like go really deep into that. If you're really open to that, if you're really open to do a lot of research, to do a lot of stuff like that, to really understand, then I think if you connect those two parts, then you'll be good at it. But you also need to understand that the mental health of entrepreneurs in any way, whether it's social entrepreneurship or it's traditional entrepreneurship, it's really hard. Like 70% of entrepreneurs, they say that their work is really stressful and they have 80% more chance to actually have a mental health issue. So I think it's something that should be spoken about. It's not easy. It's not an easy job. So first take care of yourself and then take care of other people because otherwise you'll be burned out really quick.
So my perspective is that in my case, it was very natural for me because I've started coding quite early. So I was always building some products or projects or some apps and so on. So then when I was deciding what to do with my life, it was kind of a natural decision to keep doing that. And obviously, as I was reevaluating my choices, the analysis got more in depth. And I think I do have a set of traits that are good for being an entrepreneur. So I think it can be a good perspective for others. So in my case, I think it's good. I do have like a hard skill of software engineering, and then I'm pretty good at being I'm good enough at many different things like design, soft skills, marketing, and so on. So I think this skill set of having one specialty and something that you know in depth, and then having a lot of different skills that you will have to use as well. That's a good skill set or set of skills to have. And I would say drawing on that, I think as an entrepreneur, you have to be ready to always be put in new situations, and I think you have to like being put into new situations, and that's where the generalist skill set is very good.
Yeah, I very much agree. Just like to illustrate, I think what it means in practice. I was talking with the EA Poland organizers, I think 2 days ago, or even yesterday, and they were saying, "Oh, I think like Poland could be a good place for entrepreneurship and all of this. So it'd be nice to like build community of entrepreneurs and kind of like do some community building around that." And when Daniel heard that, he was like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna do it." And I think it does shows this kind of like agentiness, this kind of like seeing something that needs to be done and kind of like having the agency to say, okay, I am the person who's going to do this, and instead of waiting for others to pick it up. And I think this is often very, very necessary, because otherwise, an opportunity might go unaddressed for a really long time if there's no person who is ready to step up and just say, I'm going to do it. And I think it's very kind of, that's almost like the fundamental thing that I notice entrepreneurs have in common. So.
I mean, fully figuring it on this point, trying to get things done, that's definitely something that like you have to do as an entrepreneur, because like you have to take responsibility for what you're doing. Like if you're not going to do it, it's not going to get done. If you drop the ball, it's not going to continue. Like this is very important. I think beyond that, I would add 2 more traits. One of them is being very comfortable with uncertainty. Basically like, things going to be changing a lot, but also being very comfortable with, I guess how to say, like, being annoying to others, being like, you're going to be passionate about the project, you're going to be talking to a lot of people, a lot of time you're going to hear rejections and no's, and people will be like, well, we don't have time, or it's not there. You have to be okay with this and keep on going. Basically, it's like, there's another day, I have to start again and keep on going. I think that's something that's very important, because otherwise it's very easy to just stop doing this. Personally, I feel like before I started working on Lafiya, I had this idea of entrepreneurship that I had like all those doubts about legal stuff or admin, or like how do I set up a bank account, or like how do I deal with like audits, or like kind of dumb things like this. But I think like for me there was almost a stopping point, and from my experience these are details. You're always going to find people to help you with this. You can outsource it, you can get all those things done. You don't need to be an expert in all those things. I think like, I mean here, like, the other both speakers have very good like hard skills and a lot of expertise. I think what I'm doing is much more generalist role, and being okay with not knowing a lot of things and learning from everyone on an everyday basis. It's very important. I would actually probably stress that a lot of times don't need a lot of hard skills as much as you have the personality or not giving up and just trying to get things done and being okay to try again. I think a lot of good entrepreneurs that I've seen are not necessarily very successful the first time. A lot of times the second time or third time, like they just keep on trying, and a lot of times they have smaller projects that they don't work out, but they learn a lot. And the fact that they continue growing this is probably the best way of looking at like the success rate of the next thing they're going to be doing.
Yeah, definitely. That's something I noticed within the kind of our cohorts at Trading Entrepreneurship Entrepreneurs. Of course, there are sometimes people who are very, very knowledgeable about the field they work in. In fact, they often become kind of like mini experts or full experts in the domain, partly because they get obsessed about topic and they just keep talking about it, regardless what it is, whether family planning or shrimps or whatever else. It's just something that is constantly on their mind. That can lead to challenges as well, of course. So I think kind of like sometimes it is the knowledge, sometimes it's the skills, but also that's not always something that every person has. And rather what we see, at least with our work, what really unites people is this kind of like basic predispositions, those basics kind of like attitude, this agency I mentioned about, this kind of, getting things done and having an itch you have to scratch because otherwise it's like driving you crazy because it has to be done. You see it has to be done. And kind of this resilience that I think all of you kind of mentioned. I think entrepreneurship is a pathway that has ups and downs, sometimes more downs than it has ups, sometimes reverse. So I do think it's just not enough to be like gritty and persistent and, in a Polish style, like cleanse our feet and like, I'm going to do it, I'm going to survive this thing, but rather have this kind of like still get energized by the challenge and kind of be irrepressible. You cannot be squished, even when there are like downs and challenges or failures that will happen. Then having that bouncing back to the same level of enthusiasm and energy about that. Because again, not every enterprise is successful at first. Sometimes it takes a couple of tries. So it would be a shame if there was a person who could start something really, really great in whatever domain and gave up after the first attempt because it didn't work out. I think for many of us, including me, the first attempt haven't been that successful. And I think it's just about keep going, learning from this experience and keep going and trying again and again until you make it. Great. So we touched a little bit on the challenges, but let's talk also about the upside. Maybe let's start with, I guess, the impact and what sort of impact you expect to have. Why do you think entrepreneurship is a particularly good way to have impact? Where it might not be. So kind of let's talk about the impact, and then we can talk about a little bit about other upsides of it as a career path.
I forgot to pay before we start, so go ahead.
So I think the framework of significance, persistence, and contingency is a very good framework to think about, whether it's nonprofit or social enterprises or for-profits even. And I think that's a good starting point for thinking about impact. And then in terms of like what you optimize for, that depends on the type of operation that you run. So, for example, if you in the well-being space, then maybe subjective well-being is a good measurement, and you can optimize for that, and then you can see an upside in that. And in other cases, for example, in my case, I'm like my operation is trying to add more funding to the EA-aligned charities and to organize more ways to get funding. So I think that's why the entrepreneurship approach is good here, because what I'm trying to do is to find new ways, new sources of funds, so that people like Klau can not worry about funding and can worry about just impact. And I think it's very satisfying if that can work. And I also think that Altruisto is in a sphere or in the field of cause marketing, which is type of marketing in which nonprofits are partnering with for-profits to increase both fundraising efforts or funds raised and to increase sales. And I feel like this kind of the zeitgeist of our times, that people and customers care more about impact, and being able to facilitate that and to help them find new ways of having impact with their purchases can be also an interesting endeavor. And also, I think, it seems that every year the cause marketing field is growing. So I think it's very important for EA to capture at least part of that market. And it seems that no one is doing that, or not. There's not enough effort in that area. So that's also something that's motivating and rewarding, and that also kind of helps to find your why, to find the reason of going through all that struggles that Kaja was talking about. So I would say that the impact can be that, like, can be this North Star that is guiding you, and I think that's the upside of doing social entrepreneurship. And then again, to answer the last part of your question, why entrepreneurship might be a good way of doing that, because there are so many new initiatives, and this field is so young and it's so early that there are so many low-hanging fruits that it's good to start new initiatives. And to start new initiatives, you need to have some sort of an entrepreneurial mindset.
Do you want to answer? Yeah, sure. I think I have, I guess, 2 points to add to this. The first one, I think, is the impact of entrepreneurship is also the personal impact you're making, like the fact that there is someone behind it, like this like face and energy behind a new project, like it's really making a change. Otherwise, it's very hard. I've been in a lot of discussions that the conclusion of it was, we need to continue the discussions, we need to continue the debating. And I personally don't like it. I'm like, yes, it's important to continue the conversation, but like we need to end with action points. Otherwise, it was kind of like a wasted hour. And I think having someone who's actually going to be the person like, okay, so I'm going to be doing those things. Are you going to be doing those things? Can I follow up? Can I add more points? That's something that I've been like always missing. So I think that's the one part of impact entrepreneurship. Secondly, I think it's also like about, I guess, making things better than they are now. Like when you like look around, basically, watch the news, like look at any like statistics or reports on, let's say, global health in my case, the statistics are really dire. Like I am very passionate about family planning, so I'm going to mention this. But every 2 minutes, a woman dies from giving birth on like globally, and that's a statistic that I think about a lot. And it's really hard to just see it and continue moving on with your day and being like, this is, I guess it is what it is. Like, I guess someone else has to take responsibility for that. So I think that's the other part of the entrepreneurship that I really personally think is the biggest upside of this.
Okay. So just to add to that, I think about impact in a bit of a different way. I think that social entrepreneurships are, because when we think about impact, I feel like we have to always think about positive versus negative impact, because whatever we're doing, whether it's just, living and doing activities in our daily lives, or we're starting companies or NGOs, it will always have some positive and some negative effects. So I think social entrepreneurs, they think more about balancing the positive with the negative ones. While if you're a, let's say, traditional entrepreneur, for example, Google, right? So they do a lot of good, but they also do a lot of bad. So if you don't measure the negative impact of what you're doing, then you may feel like you're changing the world for the better, but you're actually maybe not, right? So for me, the impact is also about the negative impact, which we always have, whatever we're doing. So for us, like in our company, I also focus really strongly on what kind of negative impact we can have by doing what we're doing, and how we can balance that with the positive effect, or how we can lower that negative impact. So for me, it's also important.
Yeah, I guess.
I want to add that I think there is a tension between bias towards action in entrepreneurship and bias towards inaction in EA community. So I think that EA community is cares very much about not having unintended bad consequences, and that can cause people to not take action. Whereas in entrepreneurship, as Klau said, you have to have this feeling of like, okay, we need to do something about it. We need to do something about it now. And I think part of being an EA and social entrepreneur is trying to balance those two perspectives or those two factors influencing your decisions. And I think one of the solutions for that may be to find the local space which you understand and in which you can predict what kind of negative consequences you can have, and try to minimize them, and also accept that you're gonna face some, probably you're not gonna be perfect at predicting what can go wrong, and then you will have to face it and fix it. And also I think it's important not be afraid to break something and then say sorry and fix it.
To this, you also have to keep on thinking, like, if you're not going to be the person who's taking action into this problem, if the person who's going to take the action, like not you, someone else, are they going to be also as aware of unintended bad consequences? It's also like the counterfactual of like, well, you're going to be inactive because things may have been difficult. Like maybe there's too many negative like impacts. If then Google comes in, like they may not have the same measurements, like Kaja does, for example.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those and like things that for suggesting a solution of like, hey, let's find like a local optimum and try to like make it best and really see what effects we're gonna have and like try to predict this. And I think then of this risk mitigation aspect is important still. Another way to do it is something that kind of like baking those feedback loops to really check what effects you're having, and kind of like, especially with like for-profit entrepreneurship, maybe it's a little bit easier because, you're offering product. Then if people are not interested in the product, you're not getting users, you're not getting customers, you're not getting revenue. There's some easy way to know whether you're progressing well. With kind of more social enterprises or nonprofit, there's no like a dollar sign that's going to tell you whether you're doing good or not. The measures are much more harder to pin down and harder to monitor. So maybe speaking a little bit, building on that, we did have a question on the app as well about specific kind of like examples how either social impact is being measured within your organizations or companies, maybe even specifically what sort of metrics outside of the dollar sign are you using to really track that kind of like social impact? And I know it's hard. I know it's hard often to pin down, and the kind of more broad effects you're having, the harder it's really to monitor what it is. But maybe there are some ways you have in mind for measuring social impact of your work, and then maybe other concrete metrics you're monitoring to have a sense of this.
I can start on this question. Like, this is a question that we were thinking about a lot, because we have some like industry standards of what we're doing. So industry standard would be like, for example, DALI's like averted. Like, we can calculate this. It's not a perfect model. We can have a cost-effective analysis and see like how cost-effective we are, like how many lives we can save, how many unintended pregnancies we can prevent, how many abortions we can prevent. All of this we measure. It's obviously like an approximation, to trying our best, but that's industry standard. But one thing is not being measured in this is generally like the fact that everyone deserves, a universal right to family planning, to be able to decide about their bodies, about their lives, and about the future. And it's really hard to put a number on this. It's really hard to put a number on, well, for example, for a 14-year-old girl, if she receives contraception, well, she not only can continue going to school and has better income, but also like her life completely changes. Like she can actually develop more and become more mature as a person before taking the responsibility as a parent. And we're still looking for some answers on that. For clarity, we usually use the health metrics and the health outcomes, because that's what people are expecting from us. But like, I think it's not giving first justice and service to what we're doing, but so also like really missing an important part. So it's definitely an important question to have.
Just I'll add for people who don't know what DALI framework is. DALI is disability adjusted life years. It's a framework, common metric that captures how much health improvement a person is gaining. And DALI is equivalent of like 1 year in full health. So when you're affecting DALI, you either affect number of years person's living, but also like what health improvements they have throughout that. And that kind of metric that is commonly used in health economics to measure that.
So in my case, it is actually a dollar sign, because my efforts are about raising funds for charities. So it is much easier. I would say that there are a couple of frameworks to think about it, especially when you're trying to account for like other effects other than money donated. If you're providing some free services or organizing some cheaper services, you can use social ROI, which is a very simple model of trying to establish what's the market value of the thing that you've provided and how much you've paid for providing for it. And then you try to measure the ROI. And it is simplistic, but I think it can get you some approximation of how well you're doing. And I've mentioned before that for specific types of operations, obviously, there are different measurements. And for global health, it's probably DALI's. For mental health, it's probably subjective well-being. So it's hard to give like a general framework for measuring impact.
Okay, so as surprising as it may sound for us, it's not a dollar sign, actually. What we measure is the number of specialists that offer free consultations, because what we are doing is we're trying to gather as many mental health specialists on our platform as we can, and we're trying to encourage them to offer free consultations for the patients as well, so they can, or low-paying consultations or low-paying therapy. So what we're trying to measure is how many slots every month they can offer with free consultations, and how big of a percentage of our specialists on our platform offer free consultations. So it's not like we are not probably able to measure the social impact on a like global scale or like a country scale, but what we're aiming is trying to help people to have access to free therapy, free psychological help, and for us it's our main goal for now when it comes to social impact. So we just measured that, and it's actually not really a dollar sign, but it is connected to that, right? Because the more specialists we have, the more money we make in a way, but also we actually pay them to offer free consultations as well. So we just measure how many free visits people could book this month, and for us, it's important.
Yeah, it does seem to be important because on one hand, kind of when we think about the impact of whatever enterprise we have the whole theory of change, how the things that we do ultimately leads into impact at the end. But in the meantime, you have lots of kind of like the outputs of your work, the outcomes, what it leads to. And then like at the end of you have the social impact. And in a way, the social impact is the most important thing, but it's also the hardest to measure. So I think kind of like we can start often with like measuring the outcomes, outputs, in even the inputs or the activities you're doing. And that is kind of like what monitoring part of your work is. And then there's kind of the evaluation part that takes you from, okay, looking at what we've done, what actions have resulted from our actions, what is the impact of that. So for example, when it comes to mind, in Daniel's case with Altruisto raising money for effective charities, your outcomes of your work is the money donated to organizations, but the impact of that is what the organization are going to do with those money and what effect it has on the beneficiaries that otherwise wouldn't have happened if not for the funding raised by Altruisto or other Więcej Dobra, so more good, so other initiatives. So I think kind of like, sometimes there is limitation in measuring impact, but at least you can measure outputs. That's kind of the easier part that is definitely still worth doing. And then attempting to measure the impact as well at the end of that is important as well.
And I'll just add that even if in the case of just measuring money donated and with, in my case, which is simpler, there's still like positive effects that are harder to measure, like introducing people to the idea of effective altruism and maybe inspiring them to think about their lives in a different way or to consider different perspectives. So if we assume that there is a value in more people knowing about effective giving or more people knowing about effective altruism, there's also, even in my case, which is the simplest I think here, there are some things that are harder to measure.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we know this is a challenge in general. About kind of other challenges, I think often what people, also the questions I hear from people is like, what have you not expected? What surprised you? What was a challenge? You were getting into it, you had some probably expectations about how it's going to look like, but what turned out to be a challenge that maybe you didn't expect as much, and how have you dealt with it? Maybe what sort of lessons you've learned as a result of that?
So I think I'm going to echo what Kaja said before, that taking care of yourself and self-management is really important, and it can be really hard, especially when you're trying to combine traditional commercial career with running social enterprise. That can be very challenging, and there are a lot of long hours. And I think the lesson and maybe even an advice that I would give is that it's really important to win. We all are trying to win. And we're all striving to do something really good, but it's really also really, really important not to lose, not to burn out in a way that you cannot have another try, or not to go into such debt that you will not be able to start a new venture, because I think we all have years still ahead of us of career, and preventing yourself from having another try is really, really bad. And as Klau said, usually, and Carolina, usually or often or sometimes it takes multiple tries to be successful. So I think taking care of yourself and not losing is really important, and that's the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for me, I guess it's trying to balance the needs of our two target groups, which are both need our attention and our help, let's say. So on one hand, we have mental health specialists that are also, in a way, they need our help to promote what they're doing, to educate about their work, to help them get more clients in an ethical way. And on the other hand, we have clients that need psychotherapy, that need psychological help. And for us, it's really hard sometimes to make decisions, because one decision can be good for one side and bad for the other, and on the also the other way around. So not only we have to think about social impact, but we have to think about social impact on both of these groups that sometimes have different needs, and this is a struggle sometimes. Of course, it's only about two-sided markets and two-sided target groups, but for us, it's challenging because both of them are clearly in need of some help. They have some social issues that we need to address, and trying to connect those two, it's really challenging for us in our company. So there's like even additional level of measuring the impact. So.
And I think for me would be two things. One would be like the lack of community that I thought it's going to be there, because a lot of times it's just like you on your laptop at like 3 a.m. just finishing some like application, and it feels quite lonely. And it feels like like it's easier to have like a bigger community if you work in a bigger team. And if you have like your coworkers, you can complain about your boss. It's okay. You can all commiserate in that. Here it feels sometimes quite lonely. Especially the second point is there's a lot of responsibility, and there's a lot of like you feel like you need to keep going, and it's very hard to take a break. That's why I think there's lots of many mental health issues with entrepreneurs, and the responsibility of like for your team as well, like beyond the impact that you're giving, basically the impact that you're making for your target group, you also are responsible for people you work with every day. As an example, like our most recent employee, she is great. Her name is Mariam. Mariam is also the age of my mom. I found out recently, and she has three children, and she left her like very also well-paid job to work with us as a program officer in one of local states. And when I think about financial like runway, I no longer think of this as like all the numbers and what's going to be. Beyond the impact, I'm also thinking about the team and thinking about the responsibility that I'm making. And that's why it's quite hard to be able to share like your struggles or challenges very frankly and honestly with your team, because you don't want them to worry about it. You don't want them to worry about what's going to happen next month. So you take it all yourself, and then you come home and you think, okay, but how do I deal with this? And a lot of times in like social media or on LinkedIn, there's just successes I think we all struggle with that. But, as an entrepreneur, it's also like you feel more responsibility for your action. You cannot be saying that another team didn't do well, or the markets are that bad. You're like, maybe I could have done more. So I think this feels a bit isolating and challenging.
That very much relate to this point, because there's responsibility you have to beneficiaries and responsibility you have to your team, and especially as your team is growing, there's more responsibility to take on you as well. And it's hard balance sometimes, right? Because like, of course, you're not the charity for employees, you're charity for beneficiaries, but also making sure they are taken care of. It's a balance to strike. It is generally seems like a tough challenge. So thanks for sharing that, and that's something kind of I want to do, kind of repeat what Klau said about the importance of the community. And I think it is often feels like a lonely endeavor, and that's something we've seen in our cohorts of entrepreneurs as well. Is when we survey people before the program, asking them, hey, what do you think is going to be the most helpful element of the whole incubation program? They often say, oh, it's going to be the funding, the seed funding I'm going to get. That's kind of what I need. I get everything, right? It's fine. Just give me funding and I'll be fine. And when we actually survey people after the incubation program and ask the same question, what was the most important for you? It was like, whoa, it was the confidence it gave me that I can be actually the person who can do it. And the community it brought me as well. Just community of like like-minded people who do care about the same things, like who go through very, very similar challenges. And regardless whether you work on, global health issues or shrimp welfare or your meta charity, often the struggles, the challenges are very similar. And I think kind of like having that community support is very crucial to make it work, or having a co-founder you can really, sometimes vent out to or share, or someone who, when you are having doubts, will be there to say, you're fine, we're going to be fine. And I think that's just very important. Entrepreneurship doesn't have to be a lonely experience. And often we kind of see, the entrepreneur on the stage, the solo, amazing person, having it all kind of thing. It's always the team, the whole team behind that person. And I think that's something that you have to remember as well. If you're thinking about the entrepreneurship journey for yourself, don't just think that I will be this lonely person with no one else supporting me. If you go for an incubator, there'll be so much support in that. If you connect to a community of entrepreneurs as well, regardless of incubators or not, like just having that sort of support community, I think it's super, super important and something that'll make it the job easier. Okay, we talked about challenges. I think I'm really glad we have this space where you can very honestly say, this is the expectations if you go to this career pathway. But I guess the question I have for you, knowing all of this, going through all of that, would you decide it again to go to this career path, and do you want to continue on this? So giving it all, kind of, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I would 100% go for this. I think I'm really glad I didn't know all of the difficult parts, because I don't think I would have done it. I would be too stressed. But the lows are low, but the ups are the highs are even higher. I feel like you feel so much agency about what you're doing. Before, I was really struggling with how I also started basically working on Lafiya. Is I work in consulting, and I felt really unhappy with the end of my day. I basically was thinking I've spent many hours, I tried very hard. What is it all for? And it's all for making my boss of my boss, another boss, a bit richer, and making sure all my Excel spreadsheets look amazing. But I just felt it's a bit empty. I felt if something happens to me next day, I'm gonna be replaced tomorrow. There's gonna be basically my counterfactual impact is almost non-existent there. And I don't feel like this anymore. And I think even though it's difficult and it's lonely and it's challenging, and there are also difficulties, at the end of the day, it feels like it's just worth it, basically, continuing or working on that. So that's why I would 100% go for this. And I think the other perk that we haven't mentioned, but I think it's important, having control over your time and having control over your day. I think it's another huge benefit that I would really miss if I would have to stop being an entrepreneur now.
I will have to agree. I think that both having a very strong why and then having agency, these are also two very important things for me. And I think it's true that a good why can bear anyhow. And that emotional reward from feeling like you're doing the thing that you should be doing at the time that you should be doing is strong enough that even if something is going wrong, it guides you to go through it. So yeah, I agree.
Okay, as for me, my logical side would say I wouldn't do it again. My emotional side would say probably I would. But I think it's what I would do again probably is to rethink the business model that I'm choosing to help, because I believe maybe it's I would try to strive for a maybe a bit simpler model, let's say, because juggling two sides of our target groups, investors, profit, non-profit part, etc. It's sometimes it's really challenging. I love it, but at the same time, I think I would maybe first try to measure the impact of different ways how we can approach this, and then build something similar or maybe completely different in the same area, because definitely it's something that I want to help with, like the mental health I'm really passionate about. But when it comes to how we approach the problem, I think we can do it from many different ways. And I think it's really good to try to try to measure, not measure, but assess the impact first. Of course, it wouldn't be exact numbers, but maybe you would be able to say, oh, okay, in this way, I will have to spend a bit less time, less money, or whatever, but achieve similar results. And while doing that, I can have bigger impact, but it will cost me more, I don't know, mental health, time, etc. So I think that's also important part, not to just focus on the first idea you have, but compare different ones. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, let's spend the last couple of minutes on the questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, just raise your hands or just ask a question if you have any.
Yeah, so I have a question about I would like to back to the question about measuring impact, because maybe I will try an example. If we have an organization which the goal of this organization is to have a money and direct this money to a specific area, and there is another organization, let's say it's for example government organization, and the money is from government budget, taxes, etc. And this organization see that this in the commercial area organization have a success in this project, and decided to resign from this work, to cancel the project, cancel the program, because this is there are nice results in the commercial area. does that make any sense? And this organization, in the government organization, starting to think that this program is not needed and they can close it. It could be closed.
Okay, just to check. So the question you're having is like, how to measure the impact you're having, especially in the face of like big decisions, like for example, shutting down a project completely, and how to. Did I get it right?
Sorry, maybe not. I mean, if we have two organizations, and
Okay.
One of them is don't have a problem with the money because of
Okay.
the financial is from government taxes, etc. And this organization see that there is another organization, and this organization have a very nice results
Okay.
of this area, and so decided to just close these activities, government activities,
Okay.
because they are not needed now because of this
The charity.
good result.
Yeah. Okay.
So the general impact of these two organizations could be bad impact because of this is high,
Yeah.
and this is even higher, but close up.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that I understood. So the example of that situation would be if there's a government-funded program and there's a commercial solution for that as well, and the commercial solution is working so well that the government decides to close the program. Yeah, so I guess these are sort of unintended consequences that are hard to predict. The world is really complex, and there are very complex dependencies between or interactions between different entities, and I think this sort of decisions are hard to predict. It's maybe easier to see it from hindsight, but from the very beginning it's very hard to see it. Honestly, I'm not sure if I can see any solution that could prevent that. I don't know if you have.
I think like we see it a lot with working in what traditionally was used to call like international aid, and like governments sometimes relying too much on international aid, be like not developing their own programs, or there's a kind of a dark history to this. And I think that's something that I am very aware of, like working on family planning in Nigeria specifically, is like, if we're working so well, why would incentivize the government to work on this? Which probably would be better, would be the better use of resources. Like that would be the ultimate goal, rather than, have a nonprofit, because then this team that could go to a different cause, work on different thing. So like what we are trying to do is put it in part of our model, basically. Like what is the sustainability path? Like what are the other options? Like the counterfactual impact, basically. Like if it were it for us, like what is the gap? Would anyone step in? And here specifically is working very closely with the government to ensure that like they don't feel like they're not needed anymore. If not, like opposite, that this is just a temporary step for them to take a full ownership over this at the end of the day. Like our partner organization actually had a success in this. So they trained. So the situation is that there's very few doctors and health workers basically in northern Nigeria. In Kebbi State, there's one doctor for 50,000 people. And this organization took a step and they trained 1,000 women to become nurses and midwives and provide the medical health. But they didn't just like end there. They didn't were like, well, this is it. We're going to be continuing doing this for many years, and we're going to become basically the de facto like education for healthcare in the country. They basically partnered with the government, and they got government to start financing it step by step, mostly like a state government, afterwards a federal government. So their best learnings, the fact that they could try it with a great team and great innovative programs, actually was used to bridge the gap and basically show the government there is a very effective and like cost-effective way to do this problem. So I think you're posing a very important question on that. Like it is hard to predict, but you can learn from what went wrong in other programs from the hindsight and see like would it also happen to organization, and if so, how can you predict it? How can you like prevent it?
Yeah, and I'll add to that, because we do see sometimes like the situations in the context of the charities we incubate. One of the very first thing whenever setting up our organization that has this effect that might be within the mandate of, for example, let's say health ministry, often what we recommend organizations do and what they actually do it's kind of from the very beginning of their existence, they kind of like set up the program with agreement of the given ministry or whatever department of government to really make sure that, hey, we're developing this intervention, this service. Sometimes it's in the form of technical assistance to the government. So it's not about, just doing the job and, leaving. It's often about kind of like, I know this is within your mandate. I know you are under capacity to deliver this program well. We're going to set it up. We're going to provide some technical systems. And this is later on being uptake by the government, either scale up for the government services or already integrated from within. And it's just part of the work is being done by government and part of the work is being done by the charity. And that way kind of like that ensures this long-term collaboration. So I think there are some ways to prevent it. And then later on, on the evaluation side, when you evaluate the impact of this, you would be taking into account the counterfactuals, like what would happen otherwise if not for the work that you're doing. And if some of this help will be provided by other funders, other organizations, or governments, institutions, you'll discount your impact by the impact that would have happened regardless of your work. And that could either be negative, and then you should shut down potentially and, try to revitalize the programs that you might have affected, or you'll see that it's clearly net positive and you'll continue even though there are some effects because still more people get helped, still we reach more on the beneficiaries, even though some of the programs scale down. Because if they scale down, they probably are going to spend those resources somewhere else, creating that impact as well. So there's like flow through negative effects, but there could be also flow through positive effects. All right. Any last points on this before we share?
Can I also answer this question?
Absolutely,
because
go
it's
for
time
it.
over. So sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So the question you ask, it's really important in our case, for example, because the more we fund free consultations, the less the government has to do, to be honest. Because if the queues for the psychological help are big, then it kind of forces the government to do something, right? So they kind of feel they need to hire more specialists, etc. If we do that, on the other hand, then the queues are lower. Let's say we would love to if they would be lower, and in that case, the government wouldn't feel that much pressure to help with the same issue. But on the other hand, when we think about the people, we are thinking about, in our case, it's suicides, right? If we don't help and the government is not changing that fast, then people are basically taking their lives. So we need to do that, and on the same hand, like think about how we can impact the government too, but without stopping what we're doing, because otherwise it would basically be also negative impact. So it's hard, definitely.
Yeah. All right. Thanks much again for all the questions you've asked. Thank you for all of you for answering and being here and sharing so openly about the challenges and the successes of entrepreneurship. I'm sure we are all around the conference. So if you do want to chat, at least in my case, I also have office hours tomorrow. Happy to chat. And also if we just bump each other in the conference, probably other panelists will be happy to chat about that as well. So thanks so much.